trying to get certified to grant a bachelor's degree
Really?
in allied health science.
It's the backwards movement. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Take a graduate
Can
school.
we start?
Okay, you ready to start?
Yep,
Sure.
we're ready to go.
Okay, we'll kind of go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 here, and we'll break for a second, and I'll start.
Okay, cheat over this way a little with your, okay. Okay.
It's a sunny and pleasant spring afternoon, April 30, in the year 2001, and we're in Chicago. My guest this afternoon is Dr. George D. Malkasian, the 40th President of the American College. George, great to have you here today.
Thank you, Warren.
We've known each other, it's fair to say, I think, a pretty long time, but we like to start out, because we keep these records for the future and learning all about you that we can. So let's begin by having you tell us where you were born and when. Well, when we'll forget. Well, just tell me where you were born.
I was born in Springfield, Massachusetts in the great year of 1927.
That was a vintage year.
It was. Lindbergh flew the Atlantic. Mayo started building its primary buildings.
And I was born.
Lots
But how did you wend your way from Springfield, Massachusetts to be a physician at the Mayo Clinic?
Well, basically, I left high school, went in the Navy at the very tail end of the Second World War.
Where were you in the Navy?
Camp Perry, Virginia, and on an AKA, an amphibious cargo attack.
In the Atlantic?
Ship. In the Atlantic. It was the very tail end. I never saw
There
any
was not
combat.
action.
No. Left the Navy, went to Yale for 4 years, went from Yale to Boston University School of Medicine, and while I was in Boston going to medical school, the professors constantly referred to a clinic in the cornfield, some Midwestern clinic, somewhere west of the Mississippi they did this. And of course, medical students being what they are, we all went to the library to see what these references were, and they were all coming out of the Mayo Clinic. And when I left medical school, I got married, and when it was time to do a residency, I said to Mary Ellen, what do you think? We ought to go see what's out there in the Midwest. So that's how I got out to Mayo.
What attracted you to medicine?
Actually, it was the ship's physician. I was in an engineering gang on that ship and thought I wanted to go to engineering school. But the boredom of the ship and the fact that there were a whole bunch of college graduate engineers, oil and grease and engines, just like I was, I thought, gee whiz, what's this all about? And the ship's doctor was just out of medical school, and he came from the same hometown I did. I rode the train home with him one weekend, and he kept saying to me, gee, you know, you ought to go to medical school. It's more exciting than engineering. So that's how it started.
Well, it was good for us that happened. And
Yeah.
So when you graduated from Boston University, did you consider places other than the Mayo Clinic, or was that your real choice?
Well, in those days, the internships, I did that in Worcester, Massachusetts. And yes, I did Strong Memorial and Boston City Hospital. And the reason I considered Boston City Hospital was there was a chap named Benjamin Tenney, whom you probably knew pretty well.
I didn't. I know his name, but
He was the chap who got a large number of our medical school class to think about obstetrics and gynecology, and he ran the program at Boston City. But Mayo sounded more exciting.
was it a 4-year residency program that time, or did it begin with an internship? And
I had an internship by the time I got to Mayo.
In Worcester.
In Worcester.
Okay.
The residency program was 3 years. I wound up, after that residency program, going back in the Navy as a medical officer for a couple of years.
These in Korean War days?
Yeah.
Yes.
And when I came back from that, I did, interestingly enough, a year in an endocrinology lab working on FSH and LH assays prior to any of the radioimmunoassay activities.
Who were the chief figures at the Mayo Clinic in OBGYN in those days?
Larry Randall ran the department.
So Larry. Mm-hmm.
And there was a chap named Robert Wilson who followed Larry as chairman of the department. Arthur Hunt, who was active in the Central Association about the time the Academy was formed. Jack Faber, who was later chair of District 6.
Knew him well. Mm-hmm.
And those were the principals.
You were 2 years back in the Navy
Yeah.
at this time, and once again out, did you have any questions about going back to the Mayo Clinic, or were there other choices that kind of looked good to you?
Well, there were a couple other choices, but Mayo seemed to have a situation that would let you do some clinical investigation. They had the backup laboratories for support. They had people who were interested in the use of isotopes for clinical studies in those days, and it was just beginning, and I thought that was pretty interesting. So,
What year did you re-begin your career there?
1960.
60. And what all went on for you in your career medically at the Mayo Clinic? There are other things we need to ask you about, but how about it at the Mayo?
At Mayo? Well, the first few years, I did a lot of clinical studies. We did thyroxine studies, thyroid binding activities.
This is mainly in a pregnancy?
During pregnancy, yeah. And I did a lot of obstetrics the first years I was there. Then as time went on, I can't say a lot of time went on because the early 60s was when the chemotherapeutic agents became available for malignancies. And Dave Decker and Betty Muzzy and myself took a trip to NCI one day, which is kind of an interesting story in that there were people from MD Anderson and from Sloan, and those chaps just said, gee, we've got these drugs here, you guys from Mayo take Cytoxan, and you fellas take Alcoran, and they handed out these drugs. We went home with boxes of drugs, and they said, develop your protocols.
It's fair to say the times have changed, haven't they?
They sure have. But since that was going on, it was a chance to do a lot of clinical evaluation of drugs for malignancies, and I got into that more and more as time went on.
Now, many of us, and I'm certainly among them, remember you well for both your leadership in the Central Association and the college. Tell me about the Central.
That was the first organization that I got really active in. Dave Decker introduced me, and like every young physician, you've got to have a strong mentor in these associations. And that individual was Tom Macklin, whom I think you knew quite well. Tom then was very active in the Central Association, and he taught me a lot of the ropes about what made these organizations work. The use of other people as contacts. He knew many people around with lots of skills that could be harnessed to make organizations work, and he was very clever at using them.
What offices did you hold in the Central?
I was secretary-treasurer for 3 years, and then president-elect and president.
What year was that?
85.
85.
As president.
A distinguished organization for which many of us, I think, have considerable warmth. How about your career with the college, since you were our 40th president?
That started actually in the late 60s. And it started with my activities in District 6.
Mhm.
At that time, Fred Hoffmeister was district chair. Jack Faber followed him. And Fred was an interesting chap. He liked to get very young people into these things. And believe it or not, I fit that description at one time. So Fred got me interested in doing stuff with the district. When Jack Faber came along, I set up a district meeting that I believe you were at in Rochester, and it's probably the only district meeting that's ever been held in a town that small.
I remember it. It's,
so
I think we began by having an informal meeting in your kitchen.
I believe that was about how the district ran in those days. So.
And then you moved ahead in the district. How then did your involvement in the national ACOG come about?
I went through the usual district chairs. I was secretary for a while, and then vice chair. And during that time, the chap who was chair died, John Herod. Mm-hmm. So that's another kind of cute story. He died just before the annual clinical meeting, and so the folks at the college said, "Well, just wear his robe." And John was about 5'3" and 300 pounds, and his robe was up to my knees. And he was from the University of Alabama. And when it was all over, I had several people say to me, "Gosh, I didn't know you went to the University of Alabama." So I finished his term and then was district chair, and that ended in 1988. And after that, I was fortunate enough to be president-elect and president of the college.
Meaning you obviously done a good job as a district chairman. Were there particular themes or interests that you carried through in your year as college president?
I think some of the activities, of course, at that point, professional liability was the big focus of the college activities. Quality assurance programs had been started, and they came to fruition with a lot of publications during that time. And that sort of activity I remember pretty well. The thing that I got involved in around that time that probably was, to me, one of the more satisfying things that came out of the college, for me personally, was getting involved with the International Affairs Committee. And through that, I got into FIGO, and when I attended one of the FIGO meetings, they had this fellowship program for young physicians from developing countries. And several of them said, "Gosh, you fellows in the United States have a lot of resources, and we don't have any way of really evaluating our residency programs and where we stand and whether the curriculum is any good or it isn't." And I came back to that International Affairs Committee and sort of got things rolling that now has developed into a program with South America, in-training exams, criteria. I was involved in the first exam and its evaluation and interaction with the group in South America and getting the educational materials that the college supplied. And
but you played other roles in FIGO as well.
Yes.
You have to say a word about them.
Okay. I sat on their executive board as a representative from American College for several years, and then I was elected vice president of FIGO, and along with that role went chairman of the Congress Organizing Committee and
That was for which of the meetings?
That was for the meeting in Washington in the year 2000.
Just concluded.
Just concluded. I worked during that time again in conjunction with American College of OB/GYN, which was fabulous support, and they really threw their shoulder into that, and it was a good meeting.
Say a word about the meeting. It was, I think, almost a record attendance, wasn't it? And,
It was, yeah. We had, for a FIGO meeting, we had over 11,000 people there. So from the standpoint of just attendance, it was the largest meeting. It also had the most intense scientific meeting of any of them. It was mainly with support from the American College of OB/GYN, and also with the very intense activity of Lord Patel and the Royal College. He brought a lot of weight to bear on his friends around the world from the Royal College.
And he had many.
And he had many, yes. So he was the other Lord that was referred to this
Today.
morning.
Well, that was certainly one of the highs in your career. What's happening now?
Well,
No, it's certainly not low, but perhaps it's slowed down a bit.
it has. Sort of as something to do to keep me out of the house mornings and afternoons and now evenings. I run Four County Medical Society in southeastern Minnesota. We have about 2,400 members. It's kind of a unique county
Really?
medical society in that because Mayo's there, the County Medical Society doesn't run Con Ed programs. It doesn't run programs that relate to financial matters in practice. It runs public health programs. We're involved in writing a smoke-free restaurant ordinance for the city. We're involved in setting up an 11-county immunization registry. As a medical society, it has no ego, so we have no ownership for any of these things. And we can get people together and they talk, and these things happen. It's been fun.
Your leadership skills are still playing.
I learned them from you, Warren.
I think you live on a lake now. Say a word about that.
Ah, yes. That's the love of my life outside of my wife of 47 years, who has been a great support through all of this.
We all like her.
Thank you. I'll tell her. We have a lake home. We've had it for 20 years, and I enjoy being out there. I have a garden, and we raise the usual stuff, can the usual stuff, and the grandkids love it, and we love having them out there. So when I finish with this County Medical Society, we'll spend more time out there with the grandkids.
George, it's been a great career in which you clearly have done, just as we've talked about today, all kinds of impressive things, and it's simply because I guess you've been an impressive person at every level at which you've worked. I thank you, and the college thanks you as one of our really important past presidents.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.